84 people dead, a city leveled to the ground, political corruption and bribery, and a corporation that was found guilty for all of it. This is the story of the deadliest corporate crime ever successfully tried and prosecuted in the United States. Roll intro. Mind-boggling. And as we get into it, you're just going to keep hearing more and more jostling around in the wind. Power lines as old as 108 years old. Jewish space laser, thin out forests, which happens to be Butte County. So many horrific and tragic events often get laced with like conspiracy theories and all sorts of gobbledygook, but the truth never kind of comes out. We're just kind of left hanging on what actually happened, but that is not the case with this topic, okay? And today's topic is the 2018 Camp Fire that ravaged through California, specifically the city of Paradise. And the guilty party is PG&E, the Pacific Gas and Electrical Company, which is a privately owned utility. And guess what? They had to plead guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter. 84 counts. And you might be thinking, well, even if this company somehow did start this wildfire, why were they held responsible for every single person's death criminally? That's kind of unprecedented, like, for this level of something to happen. Well, we're gonna get into that because it was their fault unequivocally. They didn't even try to fight that it was their fault. That's how much they were at fault. So let's get into it. So how the fire started, it's really simple to break down. There's these power lines that run along a ridge up above the city of Paradise. These power lines had not been maintained for nearly 100 years. In fact, the power lines were 97 years old, and in not one single time had anything on the power line been replaced in this area, which is just mind-boggling. And as we get into it, you're just going to keep hearing more and more mind-boggling things, okay? The part that actually broke, it's called a C-hook, and it's a hook that holds up the like main transition line. And from 97 years of that bad boy jostling around in the wind, it snaps, and that snap and the weight of the power line is enough for the power line to fall, and it sends sparks everywhere, and it sets this entire ridge on fire. Now, why this happens to be so bad is because the ridge was up high and the wind was really strong that day and things were dry. So then it starts throwing ash off the top of the ridge down on top of the city. So there's like all of a sudden embers start landing everywhere in the city, and it's not like it was just one fire that like kind of spread. Embers sweep down and just light everything on fire all at once, you know, literally constantly new embers are landing, starting a fire here, starting a fire there, starting a fire there, starting a fire there. It lands on the roof, your house is now on fire. It lands on the neighbor's roof, their house is now on fire at the same time, even though you didn't see a fire coming towards you. Everything starts to just get lit on fire like at the same time. It's not like a typical wildfire where it starts one spot on the ground, it billows up, and yeah, the wind pushes it, but the wind can't spread it airborne like that. It was like an aerosol of wildfire. It's just so the whole situation's bad, but they are the ones who didn't maintenance this power line, and it's just crazy. So after the fire concludes, the arson investigators, they go out to where they think the fire started, looking up, and they're like, hey, that's dangling, can you get that down for us so we can investigate it? They didn't have the equipment to get it down, so they actually have to get PG&E, company that started the fire, to come out and collect evidence for them. And they asked for the entire like part that broke in one piece, and PG&E is like, no. And they just take it apart and do as many pieces as they can as they get it down. They claimed it was too big and too heavy, even though it wasn't. They could have gotten it down in one piece. They just didn't want to, and they were kind of just evidence tampering literally right in front of the investigators, who were like standing there asking for it. But they do give them everything, and they look over all of this. It's pretty obvious to them. I'm going to throw up some photos, but it's pretty obvious. You can just see exactly what the problem was. The problem is that it just gave out due to wear and tear over time, because this was a 97-year-old power line and they hadn't fixed it. I don't have any Pepsi, so Route 66 root beer going down. Primute beer. That was really bad. I tried to make a pun. I tried so hard. I got so far. In the end, it doesn't even matter. So anyway, they get down all the chunks, they do their investigation, and then they go, hey, this wasn't maintenanced ever. Clearly was like the original. And that's why this was so intense on them. Because the deeper they investigated and the more they dig, they just find out that they hadn't been maintaining their power lines at all to save money and to increase profits. They literally just weren't doing the proper inspections that they were supposed to, the proper maintenance that they were supposed to. They just weren't doing any of that. Oh, I closed the door. My cat wants in. Say, we hate corporate criminals. To paint you a picture of just how bad their maintenance problem was, one of the higher ups at the company during this investigation was found to have put on his LinkedIn profile bragging that he's great at saving companies money because he saved this company $2.8 million in maintenance fees during his tenure. Where do you think the $2.8 million was supposed to go? It was supposed to go to upgrading old power lines. And they're like, well, they haven't broke yet, so we shouldn't maintenance them. In fact, they weren't even inspecting them at the regular interval that they're supposed to inspect the power lines. They just weren't doing it. They weren't doing like the bare minimum. They just weren't doing it. So they were found guilty. To put into perspective how bad this fire was, the fire burned down 14,000 homes in and around the city of Paradise, and fewer than 1 in 10 of those has been rebuilt. Less than 10%. Only 1,350 homes have been rebuilt. And what's even crazier is most of the people who originally lived there where that house got rebuilt a lot of those houses don't have the same people moving back into them. It's so bad that people don't even want to move back to where they used to live. That's how bad it is. And it displaced 26,000 people. 26,000 people no longer live where they used to live. They got new homes somewhere else. That doesn't even account for the 84 people who died during the fire, not to mention countless pets and animals and so many acres of forest. This fire was horrific. And why so many people died from this specific fires, like I said, it wasn't like a typical fire where you could see it coming, you knew it's coming, you had a direction you could flee to. It's just everything kind of started setting on fire all at once, all around you. Every house, random streets, random woods, just everything was getting set on fire at the same time. And so many people just got trapped and surrounded by fire because of the way it was spreading. But to say how criminally responsible PG&E was, they knew that these C-hooks could fail all the way back in 1987, which was the first time they discovered that these original power lines they built were starting to fail. And they also knew, according to all of their research, the life expectancy of the power lines was supposed to only be 65 years. Any section of power line that was over 65 years old, they were supposed to be inspecting and more than likely replacing all of it, none of which they did between 1987 and the Camp Fire in 2018. They didn't inspect those sections of power lines that they knew that were older than 65 years, and they did not replace anything on those sections of power lines that they knew were that old and were well past the 65-year lifespan. They just weren't doing any maintenance. And in 2018, they had power lines as old as 108 years old that they hadn't fixed. Now, the ones that broke weren't quite that old. They were only 97 years old. But to put you into perspective, they had even older power lines than the one that gave out burned active, and they hadn't upgraded or fixed those either. This company is just bewilderingly bad. Bewilderingly bad. I said it! what? At being a good company and keeping the public safe and actually doing their job as a public utility. They're just so bad. Part of the blame can also be put on California because they have not been managing their forests well. They hadn't done a controlled burn in the area for 100 years. So there's just tons of brush everywhere on the ground. That being said, treating forests and doing controlled burns or removing the brush can be expensive. It can be between $500 to $2,000 for an acre. They need to clear about 1 million acres a year to avoid intense fires like this. That would mean it'd be between $500 million and $2 billion per year to manage the forests that are getting too out of hand or have a high risk of control burn. And that sounds like a lot of money, but just this one fire alone costs $30 billion in damages total. You can spend all that money on damages and lives, or you could spend all that money on just treating the forest, and hopefully you wouldn't have these insane fires like this. Granted, this was a pretty special and unique situation, but if they were doing the control burns and cleanup on high-risk areas, for example, like this ridge that had been just sitting for 100 years with no burns, no controlled burns, and no brush clearing, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. Maybe this wouldn't have been so insane, but there was so much loose debris on the ground that could catch fire, but then it's loose so that the wind could blow it down into the city below. That's what caused this fire to be so devastating. So a little bit of pressure should also be put on the state of California as well, because they haven't done a great job of maintaining their forests. Just their track record isn't that phenomenal. On that note, there is a reduction program where they pay loggers to go in and thin out forests that are too dense, and then they get the wood for free. And the government also kind of hands them a little bit of money, but nowhere near the amount of money they would normally spend. So that's cool that they have a program like that, but it's really not making that much of an impact. It's not the 1 million acres a year, like a few thousand acres at most. After this fire, another question that was raised, okay, well, isn't there state inspectors? Why didn't the state inspectors catch that the power lines were getting maintenance by PG&E? But you got to think, PG&E isn't the only utility company serving electricity in California. It's the largest, but it's not the only one. And just them alone, not including all the other utilities, whether electrical or not electrical, they have over 100,000 miles of electrical lines. And there's only 12 state inspectors for utilities in the entire state. And that's for all utilities, not just electrical. So you got to think the total amount of stuff that these 12 guys have to inspect is probably in the 500,000 miles of stuff that they have to inspect. So it's no surprise that 12 guys didn't make it to inspecting this one run of 97-year-old power line. And they probably didn't even realize that there was power lines that old out there, because a lot of these really old power lines are in hard to get areas. And those hard to get to areas are the ones that are least likely for these state inspectors to go visit, because it's hard. They are more inclined to keep inspecting the easier stuff that is more in densely populated areas that pose an immediate constant risk to the public. So let's get into some of the stuff that happened during the court hearing. Now, this case was prosecuted in the county that it happened in, which happens to be Butte County. I know that it's supposed to be Butte County, but we have to have some sort of levity in this video. So I'm gonna say Butte County. So in Badonkadonk County Superior Court, they prosecuted this, and during the trial, they put up an image of every single person who died on the screen and say, "How do you plead?" And every single time, the representative of PG&E, their chief executive, Bill Johnson, would say, "Guilty, Your Honor." So one of the PG&E executives had to stand there, look at somebody who died because of their negligence, and say, "We're guilty," 84 times in a row. And I can't imagine what that moment was like in the courtroom, but I imagine it had to be pretty intense. The one good thing is that at least they just stepped up and owned this and didn't try to fight it. You can't say that many good things about PG&E, but at least they did that, which is the bare minimum. After this, he was quoted saying, "I've heard the pain and anguish, and no words from me can ever reduce the magnitude of devastation. We know we cannot replace all that the fire destroyed." That's some pretty respectable words. At least this one guy who is more or less kind of like their public fall guy, stood up, took accountability, said the right things. So respect to that one guy at the company. I don't know, everyone else at the company seems to be a dumpster fire, but respect to this one guy. Yeah. What people were pretty upset about, though, was the final fine that they had to pay for these 84 manslaughter charges, because obviously, like, you can't put an entire corporation in prison, and nobody, like, was tried on a personal level at the company, which they only had to pay a $3.5 million fine and cover the $500,000 in court and legal fees and investigation fees, which a lot of people said is absurd. That feels like a slap on the wrist. I mean, the total was like $4 million. So that's like $4 million fine for 84 lives. Just doesn't really seem that fair. That's only $41,176 per person who perished. It's pretty absurd. Not to mention the over 10,000 homes that burned to the ground and 153,000 acres of forest and land was burnt to the ground during this fire. And they were only fined $4 million. Now, that might sound outraging. The silver lining is that between insurance claims and lawsuits and government agencies suing and demanding money, they ended up having to pay out a total of $25 billion of damages. So they did have to pay a huge sum of money in the end, even though the legal fines were so absurdly tiny. I don't know if they gave them small fines because they knew that they were going to have to pay out so much money from all the other ways or what, but I still think the fines should have been bigger, even with that $25 billion payout. And out of that $25 billion, $13.5 billion went to the people who lost their homes and the families of the people who died. So now let's get into the controversies and the kind of conspiracies surrounding PG&E and all the other like significant horrible things they've done. But before and after the Camp Fire, I've kind of got a timeline here we can go through. 2010, PG&E was convicted of 6 federal felonies, including obstruction of investigation from a 2010 San Bruno gas explosion. The explosion kills 8 people. They were put on probation. They were supposed to be on probation from 2010 until 2022. They paid a $3 million fine for this and were sentenced to 10,000 hours of community service. I don't know how you make a company serve community service, but I don't know if it's just like their employees went out and did that community service or what, but they had one more punishment for this crime, which was they had to run a TV commercial saying how sorry they were for blowing up some people's homes. And within 18 months of them causing this explosion, while they're running this "We're Sorry" commercial, they start 17 more small fires that don't kill anybody, but they're already going downhill at this point. Shit is already starting to hit the fan with them. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Jumping forward a little bit, they have a bunch of small fires that don't kill people every single year. Negligence is starting, but they're still not getting on top of their maintenance. They're still cutting maintenance costs. We get to 2017. They give several $100,000 to Gavin Newsom as he tries to run for governor. Now, this becomes really significant because Gavin Newsom becomes governor, and then he treats PG&E with absolute kid gloves. He just lets him get away with so much stuff. He gets put in charge of a lot of the decisions for the consequences and what to do about stuff going on after the Camp Fire. He could have made motions for the government, the state government, to take it over and make it a state-owned utility. He could have forced them to replace all their leadership, implement a whole bunch of changes. Gavin Newsom does none of this. Literally, him becoming governor and the Camp Fire happening is in like the same week. And from day one as governor, he is just babying PG&E because of all this money that they give him. And he even helps them get through their multiple bankruptcy filings following this Camp Fire fire, because obviously they had to pay out like $25 billion in damages. He helps them get through their bankruptcy. He keeps them as a company and makes sure that they're still a privately operated owned utility. There's so many things Gavin Newsom could have done, but because of all the money they gave him, he just doesn't. And if I had to describe how Gavin Newsom and his handling of PG&E makes me feel, it would be this. So shortly before the campfire, there's another fire called the Honey Run fire, where they're only fined $1,000 and it isn't criminally charged. And you might be thinking, why wasn't that criminally charged? Well, it would have broke their probation, right? So how did they get out of this? They bribed the county officials in the county this fire happened $1.5 million not to charge it as a crime. And they just give them $1.5 million to update the county and, do nice fancy things for the local residents. So they literally escape this by these local officials being willing to take this $1.5 million bribe so they can continue getting away with not properly maintaining their work, only for a few months later to cause the campfire and kill 84 people. Shortly after the campfire in 2019, a crazy thing happens. Another fire starts in nearly the exact same way. The Kincaid fire, another really old line that hadn't been maintained. The same part of the power line breaks, sparks fly, and several hundred homes burned to the ground in Wine County. Thankfully, nobody died, but a ton of people were injured. Just dozens and dozens and dozens of people were injured, and they catch more felony charges, multiple felony charges, which ended up getting filed in Sonoma County. Now their trial wraps up for the campfire in 2020, and right after the trial wraps up, they start even another fire, and this fire starts by a tree that was hanging over the power lines, breaking and falling into them, and they were supposed to be clearing the trees that were at risk of falling into these high tension, high voltage power lines. And guess what they weren't doing? They weren't doing it. So what happens when you don't do the proper maintenance? Fires happen. So a tree falls in, it starts the Zogg fire when a power line gets taken out by a tree in Shasta County. And in this fire, 4 people die, including an 8-year-old and their mother, who burned to death. Absolutely horrific. So they catch 4 more charges again. And what's even crazy about this is in the investigation of this, they had marked unsafe trees leaning over this specific power line and never went and dealt with them. Like, they literally have documents proving they knew that there was unsafe trees that would eventually take out these power lines, and they never paid a crew to go cut them down. That's how bad the negligence at PG&E is. They literally will know, like, hey, this is a problem. Like I said, they knew about the Seahook problem from 1987, and it kills 84 people in 2018. So do you think that with that track record, they got to the trees? No, they didn't. They started another fire, right? Which is just insane. And then the next year, while they're under investigation for that and going through the trial for that, then they start another fire, the Dixie Fire. And the Dixie Fire, well, it doesn't kill anybody. It burns 1 million acres. 1 million acres. Like, these fires that are happening in California that are so bad, most of them are PG&E. It's insane how many less wildfires California would have if it wasn't for the company PG&E. They're just so responsible, and it is just absolutely disgusting. There's too many to get to, but in total, during their probation from 2010 to 2022, P&G started 31 wildfires, killed 113 people, and burnt 1.5 million acres of land and destroyed over 24,000 homes and businesses, all during their 12-year probation. I don't know if this doesn't make a bad company. I don't know what does. And the fact that they have been protected by the politicians that they throw money at is just insane. Absolutely insane. And you want to hear something even more insane? While they're filing for bankruptcy over the campfire and everything having to do with that, they give local California politicians $4.4 million in political donations, and Governor Gavin Newsom, out of that, received another $200,000 of it. So, like, while he's overseeing their bankruptcy and deciding whether it should be a company or not, he gets another donation from them. So it's like, and he babies them and makes sure that they remain a company and don't get any punishments and can still be a company after the bankruptcy filing. Like, he could have made sure they were put in the right place, and he doesn't because of all of these political donations they're throwing at them. Even in the midst of their bankruptcy, they were throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at these politicians who are in charge of deciding their fate, and the politicians take it hook, line, and sinker. And the corruption here is just insane. And during over the course of all this, they have paid the largest amount of utility fines in United States history, $2.4 billion in fines just during that 12-year period, which is just absurd. I think it's even more than that, but that's the number I could find. The guy who prosecuted this, Mark Noel, he quote said that he didn't feel like it was an accomplishment to get the conviction on them because they're not learning from their history, and that's why they keep repeating it. And when he was asked to comment about some of the other fires that were happening after the Camp Fire, he said, "We'd hoped that the job we did with the Camp Fire would cause this to change, but apparently it hasn't happened." That's really upsetting because he did the best he could in that situation, trying to get some justice, trying to bring about some change, but because of all the corruption and all the gobbledygook, nothing's happened. ABC 10, which is like the California local ABC news channel, they did a series called Fire, Power, and Money. And in that investigation, they quote unquote said, Gavin Newsom's office crafted a state law to prop up PG&E's finances, supported a bankruptcy plan that prioritized business clients, governor's close friends, and PG&E's profits over fire victims, and exerted control over the independent state regulators to keep PG&E in operation. So even the news anchors local to Gavin are saying his corruption has allowed PG&E to continue doing what they're doing. We're getting close to the end, but another big controversy they had is the 7,000-page grand jury transcript. PG&E sued for it to not get released to the public, and also in their suit to get every single name of every single PG&E employee redacted from it, so nobody could be held personally responsible for their egregious mistakes over the entire situation of the last couple of decades at PG&E, which is just absurd. But what's even more absurd is they actually won that, but they messed up handling the documents, and 22 of the names still got out because they're so bad at their jobs and they're so negligent, they couldn't even protect themselves from getting outed for how awful and negligent they are, which I think is just, it's ironic and it's insane in the brain, if I had to say so myself. And one of the reasons they said they didn't want any of the names to come out because it was all low-level employees that were implicated in the document, but that wasn't true at all. Some of the 22 names that were accidentally leaked were like top officials, some of them being Dave Gabbard, who is the senior director of transmission asset management and appeared in all of their corporate videos, all sorts of public speaking roles. Another one was Raymond Thierry. He's the PG&E's director of gas distribution integrity management. Yeah, he was one of the guys who was responsible for the negligence which caused that gas explosion. Yeah, that was kind of on him. He was also implicated in the Camp Fire negligences as well. One of the reasons that local prosecutors and politicians wanted this document to get out so bad though was this was one of the fires which started the conspiracy that space lasers were causing the California wildfires. And this is kind of where the like Jewish space laser whole like conspiracy theory kind of starts and comes from, is the 2018 Camp Fire, which I've always thought that the space lasers conspiracy theory was pretty hilarious myself. Of course, I'm sure the government could put a laser in space, but are they using it to cause wildfires on their own population in the state the lasers were allegedly launched from? I really don't think so. But I'd like to close out the video with a quote from the Butte County District Attorney Mike Ramsey. PG&E acted with criminal negligence, which is a much higher standard than ordinary negligence. They acted in a way that created a high risk of death on purpose. And that's how I feel about PG&E. I don't like them. They are not cool. They are not Gucci, and they stink a butt. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and be safe when committing arson. Bye. This company is just bewilderingly bad. Bewildering bewilderingly bad.
Jesus Christ.
Bewilderingly bad. I said it!